There's a version of this decision that looks simple on a spreadsheet. Wait until 67, or better yet 70. Your monthly check is bigger. The math works in your favor. Every financial article you've ever read basically says the same thing. I used to think that framing was almost always right. Then someone told me something I hadn't expected to hear. The regret I kept hearing wasn't I claimed too late. It was something quieter. Something closer to, I waited for the right number and I missed the right years. Think about someone you know who's 61 right now. Maybe that person is you. Still working. Knees aren't what they were. One aging parent to check in on every few days. A spouse who's been patient, really patient, and keeps mentioning that road trip they've been talking about for 4 years. Nothing extravagant. Just two people in a car taking their time while they still can. This person is not naive, not irresponsible, not bad at math. They know waiting means a bigger check. They also know their body is sending signals that didn't used to be this loud. And somewhere in the back of their head is a question they haven't said out loud yet. Am I sure I want to live like this for 5 more years? For people born in 1960 or later, full retirement age is 67. Delay past that, and your benefit keeps climbing, all the way to 70, when you'd receive roughly 24% more than at FRA, real number. Real reason the advice stuck. What that advice skips: the value of $1 at 62 is not the same as the value of $1 at 78. Not because of inflation, because of what you can do with it. At 62, that money might mean fewer hours at a job that's wearing you down. A trip while you can still walk an airport without stopping. Time with grandkids while you're still the one doing the chasing, not the one being helped to a chair. So this video isn't about convincing you to claim early. And it's not about telling you to wait. It's about something the standard advice skips over almost entirely, that this isn't just an optimization problem. It's a timing problem. And those two things require very different questions. I'm not sure any fixed rule gets that right for everyone. I've been close enough to enough real retirement decisions to know the ones that age well usually start with someone asking the honest question. Not what maximizes my benefit, but what am I actually trading? And when does that trade make sense for my life? That's what we're actually going to work through. And before we get there, if you're somewhere in this window, somewhere between I know I should probably wait and I'm not sure waiting is actually the right call for me, subscribe to the channel. No pressure. But this series is built for exactly that kind of thinking. The advice itself isn't wrong. If you delay claiming Social Security, your monthly benefit goes up. That's not a sales pitch. It's literally how the system is designed. For people born in 1943 or later, every year you wait past full retirement age adds about 8% to your monthly check. Wait from 67 all the way to 70, and someone born in 1960 is looking at roughly 128% of what they would have received at FRA. That's a meaningful number. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. So the advice to wait became the default. And like most defaults, it works until it doesn't. The formula only holds if your main goal is the largest possible monthly payment, and all the other variables in your life are either stable or manageable. Good enough health, steady income until you're ready to stop. A portfolio that isn't under pressure. A spouse whose situation you've already accounted for. If all of that is true, waiting is probably fine. But I've watched what happens when people run that math while carrying a different reality. A couple sits down with their benefit estimates. On paper, waiting looks clean. Husband gets a noticeably higher check if he holds out. Looks like the obvious move. What the estimate doesn't show, they need to bridge income from 62 to 65. He's still working part-time, but it's wearing on him. Her benefit is significantly lower. She took 11 years off for the kids, then for his mother. Two people. Two very different histories. And the portfolio they're counting on to fill the gap has had a rough couple of years. Suddenly, wait doesn't mean get more. It means more time at a job he's ready to leave, more draws from an account they'd rather let sit, and more pressure on a plan that was already tight. The context made it the wrong call. This is what I mean when I say the standard framing optimizes one number while leaving the rest of the picture out of frame. Monthly benefit is one variable. It's not the only variable. And when you treat it like it is, you end up building a retirement plan around a single metric instead of around an actual life. If you've ever looked at your benefit estimate and felt like something about the just wait advice didn't quite fit, that's not you being undisciplined. That might just be you reading your own situation more honestly than the formula does. So before we get into the 7 reasons, the real question isn't 62 or 70. The real question is, when does this money actually mean the most to you and to your household? Let's start with the one nobody wants to say out loud. Reason 1. Your health is a variable, not a guarantee. The math on waiting only works if you live long enough for the higher monthly payment to make up for the years you didn't collect. That crossover point, the break-even, is usually somewhere in your late 70s, depending on your situation, which means the whole calculation is built on a bet about your lifespan. I'm not saying that to scare anyone. I'm saying it because I've seen people plan entirely around average life expectancy as if average described their specific body, their specific family history, their specific job that's been hard on their back for 30 years. It doesn't. Someone I know watched his father retire at 65 in good health, plan to travel, and spend the next 6 years managing a serious illness instead. The money was fine. The years weren't what anyone expected. That's not a cautionary tale about claiming early. It's a reminder that health trajectories aren't linear, and no spreadsheet accounts for that with any real precision. No one knows exactly how long they'll live. The problem is pretending otherwise when you make this decision. Reason 2. The go years are a finite window, and they come first. Retirement doesn't happen at a steady pace. Most people who've watched it up close will tell you there are roughly 3 phases. The early years when you're mobile and want to do things, a slower middle stretch, and a later phase when your needs shift toward care and stability, the go years. The ones where you can still drive a long stretch without stopping, walk through an airport without it wiping you out, take a grandkid to a theme park, and actually keep up. Those come at the beginning. $1 at 62 that pays for a road trip you've been putting off has a different value than $1 at 78 that mostly goes toward the same fixed costs every month. SSA's own KOH-LA adjustment for 2026 is 2.8%. Benefits do adjust for inflation. But KOH-LA doesn't solve the question of when the money is most useful inside an actual life. This is the utility problem the standard advice sidesteps. More income later is genuinely valuable. It's just not the same as income now when you can still do something with it that actually costs money to do. Reason 3. Break-even is not your life. The break-even calculation is real. If you claim at 62 instead of 67, you start collecting sooner but at a reduced monthly amount. At some point, typically somewhere in the late 70s, the person who waited pulls ahead in cumulative lifetime benefits. That's accurate math. It's also a narrow way to look at a wide problem. Break even assumes your only goal is to maximize total dollars collected from the Social Security Administration over your lifetime. It doesn't account for what you did with the money in your 60s, what pressure you took off your portfolio in the early years, or what you traded away in time and flexibility while you were waiting. Nobody I've ever talked to measures their retirement in lifetime benefit totals. They measure it in how the years felt, whether they had room to breathe, and whether they made the choices they actually wanted to make when they still had the health to make them. Maximizing your check is one goal. It's not automatically the right one. If you're at the point where you're thinking more about the years you still have energy than about the size of a monthly deposit, You're not being financially reckless. You're asking the question this decision actually requires. And if that framing sounds right to you, drop go years in the comments. I want to know how many people watching this are in exactly that window. Here's a framing most people don't hear until it's already relevant. Claiming Social Security at 62 isn't always about needing the money. Sometimes it's about protecting the money you already have. Reason 4: early claiming can reduce the pressure on your portfolio when it's most vulnerable. The first few years of retirement are the most financially fragile. Not because your expenses are necessarily highest, but because of how sequence of returns risk works. The short version: if the market drops 20% in year 1 and you're pulling $3,000 a month to cover living expenses, those shares are gone. They don't come back when the market recovers. A portfolio that takes a hard hit in the first 3 years of retirement looks very different at year 15 than one that got the same hit in year 10. Now factor in Social Security. If you're not claiming, you're covering that income gap entirely from savings. Every month you pull from your IRA or 401k to cover what Social Security would have provided is a month you're selling something, possibly at a bad time. If you are claiming, even at a reduced amount, you're giving that portfolio room to breathe. You're reducing the forced withdrawals during the window when forced withdrawals do the most damage. I've watched people do this without fully realizing it was a strategy. They claimed at 62, not because they ran a sequence of returns analysis, but because the cash flow just felt more stable. They were right, though I'm not sure either of them would have explained it that way at the time. The math backed up the instinct. Reason 5: guaranteed income now can matter more than theoretical income later. The average retired worker benefit after the 2026 KOH law adjustment is around $2,071 per month. That number doesn't describe everyone. Your actual benefit depends on your earnings history. But it gives you a sense of scale. For a household trying to cover a gap of $1,500 to $2,000 a month in the early retirement years, Social Security isn't a rounding error. It's a meaningful piece of the floor. And a floor matters differently than a ceiling. If your portfolio takes a bad year early, you want income that doesn't depend on it. Optimizing for a higher monthly check at 70 is optimizing for the ceiling. The best possible income if everything goes well and you live long enough. Claiming earlier is often about protecting the floor, making sure the early years don't quietly erode the assets you spent decades building. Those aren't the same goal. And depending on where your portfolio sits, what the market is doing, and how tight your cash flow is in the first few years of retirement, one of those goals may matter a lot more than the other. Claim early and you give up some future upside, but you buy stability during the stretch of retirement when instability is most expensive. That's not a failure of planning. For a lot of people, that's exactly what good planning looks like. Most Social Security conversations treat this like a solo decision. It usually isn't. If you're married, the question isn't just when should I claim? It's how does our household, both of us together, end up in the strongest position? And those two questions often have different answers. Here's the dynamic that gets missed most often. Take a fairly common setup. One spouse was the primary earner for 30 or 40 years. The other worked, but took time off for kids, for a parent who needed care, for a stretch when the family just needed one person to be home. Their individual benefit reflects that history. It's lower, meaningfully lower. Now they're both approaching 62, trying to figure out the same thing everyone else is figuring out. If they follow the standard advice and both wait, they're optimizing two checks independently. What they're not doing is thinking about the household as a system, and specifically about what happens when one of them dies first. Survivor benefits are where this gets important. When a spouse passes, The surviving partner keeps the higher of the two benefits, not both. Which means the size of the larger benefit isn't just about that one person's income. It's about the floor the surviving spouse will live on, potentially for years. For someone born in 1960 or later, delaying from FRA to 70 takes their benefit from 100% to 128% of their primary insurance amount. That 28% difference doesn't just affect them. It protects whoever is left. So here's one structure that often makes more sense than both wait or both claim early. The lower earning spouse claims earlier to support household cash flow in the first years of retirement. The higher earning spouse delays, not necessarily to 70, but long enough to build a stronger survivor benefit for the household. Neither person is making a bad decision. They're just playing different roles in the same plan. I've seen couples miss this entirely, not because they weren't paying attention, but because they each ran their own numbers separately. The mistake was calculating one person at a time. Age gaps, health gaps, pension income, whether one spouse is still working, all of it shifts the math. But the principle holds. If you're making this decision without modeling both of you at the same time, you're probably leaving something on the table. If you want me to do a full video just on Social Security for couples, the strategies, the timing, the survivor math, drop couples in the comments. If enough people ask, that's the next one. I want to be straightforward about something. This video is called 7 Reasons to Claim at 62, and those reasons are real. But I'd be doing you a disservice if I left you with the impression that 62 is just a good idea across the board, because the research and the cases I've followed don't support that either. What actually creates problems isn't the age. It's filing without running 3 quick checks first. Check 1, the work check. If you claim before your full retirement age and you're still earning income, Social Security doesn't just quietly pay you your benefit. There's an earnings test. In 2026, if you're under FRA for the full year, the limit is $4,480. For every $2 you earn above that, ESA withholds $1 in benefits. If you hit FRA during 2026, the threshold jumps to $65,160 for the months before your birthday. And above that, $1 is withheld for every $3 over the limit. Once you reach FRA, the earnings test disappears entirely. The withheld benefits aren't gone forever. SSA recalculates your payment upward once you hit FRA. But in the short term, your cash flow can look very different from what you expected. That gap between the estimate and the actual check. A lot of people hit it without expecting it. It's avoidable. You just have to run this number before you file. Check 2. The Medicare check. This one catches people more than almost anything else. Medicare eligibility starts at 65. If you retire at 62, you've got a 3-year gap with no employer coverage. That bridge, whatever it costs, is part of the real cost of claiming early. Missing your initial enrollment period, which runs from 3 months before to 3 months after your 65th birthday, can trigger a late enrollment penalty on Part B. The standard Part B premium in 2026 is $202.90 per month. That penalty doesn't go away. It follows the monthly premium for as long as you're enrolled. The decision to claim at 62 and the decision to retire at 62 often travel together. They shouldn't be made without each other in the same conversation. Check 3, the household check. You already heard this in the last section, but it belongs here too as a mandatory step, not an optional one. Before you file, both benefit estimates need to be on the table. Not just yours, not just your spouse's, both side by side with at least a rough look at what the survivor picture looks like if one of you isn't here in 15 years. I don't think most people need someone to tell them to claim early or to wait. I think they need a way to make this decision with their eyes open. Not because they followed a rule, but because they actually looked at their situation. That's what these 3 checks are. Not a formula, just the minimum. Claiming at 62 without running them isn't automatically wrong, but it's the kind of thing people tend to regret. Not because of the age, but because of the gaps they didn't see coming. Most people don't delay this decision because they're avoiding it. They delay it because every time they open the numbers, something feels unresolved. Too many moving parts, too many eat depends. So the tab stays open, the decision stays pending, and another month goes by. These 3 steps don't resolve every variable, but they get you out of the fog. Step 1, write down your actual monthly gap. Not how much more would I get if I waited. That's the wrong starting question. The right question is, if I stop working at 62, what does my monthly income actually look like? And how far short does it fall? Take your expected Social Security benefit at 62. Add any pension, part-time income, or planned portfolio withdrawals. Then subtract what you actually spend each month. That number, the gap, is what you're really solving for. I've seen people assume they need to wait, run this exercise for the first time, and find out their real gap is something like $900 a month. That changes the conversation entirely. It turns an abstract "should I claim early" into a concrete "can I cover $900 another way?" Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes it isn't. But at least you're solving the right problem. Step 2. Check the earnings test if you're still working. If you're planning to claim at 62 but keep working, even part-time, run this number before you file. In 2026, the threshold is $24,480 if you're under FRA for the full year. If you expect to earn more than that, your benefit will be reduced in the short term. It's not permanent, and SSA does adjust your payment upward once you reach FRA, but your monthly cash flow in the meantime will be lower than the estimate shows. If you're within range of FRA during 2026, the threshold jumps to $5,160 for the months before your birthday. Know which situation applies to you before the paperwork goes in. Step 3. Run this at the household level, not the individual level. Pull both benefit estimates. Put them next to each other. Look at the gap between them. Think about who is more likely to need the higher benefit for longer, and whether the current plan protects that person or just optimizes the near-term picture for whoever files first. You don't need a financial planner to do a first pass at this. You need 2 numbers, a rough sense of your age and health gap, and the question, if one of us isn't here in 15 years, does this plan still hold? None of these steps take more than an hour. What they give you isn't a perfect answer. It's a decision you actually understand. One you can look back at in 3 years and say, I knew what I was trading. I made that call with open eyes. That's the goal, not the optimal benefit, not the highest check, a decision that fits your life. Claiming at 62 is not a sign that you gave up. It's not a sign you didn't understand the math. For a lot of people, it's actually the result of looking clearly at their health, their household, their cash flow, and their go years, and deciding that the guaranteed income now is worth more to their actual life than a larger check later. That's a legitimate conclusion. It just has to be a conclusion you reached, not one you drifted into. I've seen too many cases where the pain wasn't the benefit amount. It was the confusion. People who claimed at 62 and later found out about the earnings test they hadn't checked. Couples who optimized individually and left the survivor picture unconsidered. Someone who retired at 62 and didn't realize their Medicare gap was going to cost more than they'd budgeted. The regret, almost every time, wasn't the age. It was those gaps. So if there's one thing to take from this video, it's the reframe. The question was never really 62 or 70. It was always I'm making this decision with my eyes open. It's still one of the most reliable income floors most households will have in retirement. But when it enters your life, at what age, under what conditions, as part of what household plan? That's the part no formula decides for you. Run the 3 checks, know your gap, model the household, then make the call. I don't believe there's one right claiming age for everyone. I do believe there's a better or worse process. And the people who feel settled about this decision years later are usually the ones who understood what they were exchanging and why. If you want to keep going deeper on this, couples strategy, the bridge years from 62 to Medicare, what to do if you're still working, subscribe and turn on notifications. That's the series. This is just the beginning of it.